Welcome back to Real Crime Stories, the podcast where we bring you crime stories from around the world. The road was dark and deserted when she pulled over. There was no struggle, no panic, just a quiet stop along a rural highway. She remained in the driver's seat, legs crossed as if expecting a conversation instead of violence. Minutes later, another car stopped behind hers. A single sound broke the silence. By sunrise, she was dead. And what truly happened on that lonely stretch of road was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Livvy Lewis was born in the small East Texas town of Hemphill, into a close-knit family that valued hard work, education, and loyalty. She grew up among pine trees and dirt roads, surrounded by relatives who knew her well. At the heart of her world were her mother, Darcy, and her grandmother, Janice. They watched her grow from a serious child into a determined young woman who dreamed of a future beyond the limits of rural life. Even as a child, she seemed older than her years. She loved plans and routines, preferred order over chaos, and tried to help rather than cause trouble. With money often tight, she learned early that every dollar mattered. Family members remembered her as someone who noticed when others were struggling and felt compelled to help, whether it was a cousin, a neighbor, or a stranger. School became her proving ground. From first grade on, she earned strong marks and quiet respect. Teachers described her as focused and dependable, always prepared and rarely in need of reminders. Friends saw her softer side, quick laughter in trusted company, and fierce loyalty to a small circle she held close. At Hemphill High School, she rose to the top of her class while others focused on social life or escape plans. She concentrated on grades and long-term goals, joining activities without letting them distract her. By her later teen years, she had already chosen her path: healthcare. Rather than waiting for college, she enrolled in a certified nursing assistant program while still in high school. She studied anatomy, completed clinical hours, passed the state exam, and graduated as an honor student with a professional credential in hand. Afterward, she enrolled at Stephen F. Austin State University, close enough to home for comfort but far enough to feel like a new world. She planned to become a nurse and eventually a physician assistant. At the same time, she worked as a nursing assistant at a local facility. Days were filled with lectures and study sessions. Evenings and nights were spent caring for elderly residents. The work was demanding: lifting, bathing, and feeding, but she handled it with patience and dignity. Residents warmed to her quickly. Coworkers remembered her gentle tone and the way she never rushed someone who needed reassurance. One colleague, Taylor, became especially close. Through long shifts and shared struggles, they formed a bond that felt like family. Before everything changed, her life followed a disciplined but hopeful rhythm: classes, exams, work shifts, and precious time with her mother, grandmother, and close friends. Her dreams were simple and steady: a stable home, a respectful partner, and a career helping vulnerable people. She avoided drama. She sought security. The man who altered that path, Matthew Hoy Edgar, came from the same region and similar surroundings. He had grown up in Sabine County, and by his early 20s was already married to a woman named Montana with 2 young sons. Locals knew him as someone who drifted between jobs and drank heavily at times. He and Livvy moved in overlapping social circles before they ever became central figures in a criminal case. At first, they were simply acquaintances in the same crowd. She was a teenager nearing graduation. He was a married father. But late-night messages and social media exchanges changed the tone. He praised her maturity and gave her the attention that made her feel understood. For a young woman longing for stability and a ready-made family, that attention carried weight, even though he still shared a home with his wife. Their early conversations were secret. He told her not to speak of them. She felt guilt and pulled away, unwilling to break a family apart. For a time, she returned her focus to school and work. Then his marriage collapsed under repeated infidelity. He moved out of the house, he admitted to cheating, and began presenting himself as a man starting over, a man who is free, an available man, and ready for a new beginning. He soon returned to the younger woman who had once shown interest in him, this time presenting himself as a man who was finally free. He said he wanted a fresh start, a stable home, and a true partner to help him raise his two young sons. To her, someone who deeply wanted family and security, his words were powerful. They began spending more time together, and she stepped naturally into the role he described. She cared for the boys, cooked meals, played with them, and worked to create consistency in their lives. For a while, it felt like she had found exactly what she had been searching for: a home, children to love, and a serious relationship built on shared responsibility. In those early months, there were genuine moments of happiness. They marked small milestones, visited relatives, and spent quiet evenings together. She decorated the boys' rooms, organized simple routines, and shared photos online that painted the picture of a normal blended family. From the outside, some saw a struggling but determined couple trying to build something steady. From her point of view, she had given her heart fully. But the first signs of trouble appeared subtly. He drank more than she was comfortable with, and alcohol seemed to change him. Jealousy surfaced. He questioned her about her phone, her friendships, and where she spent her time. His mood shifted unpredictably. He is affectionate one moment, and the next minute he is irritated or angry. She tried to explain it away as stress or drinking, convincing herself that with patience and love, she could help him manage his temper. Over time, however, the warning signs became impossible to ignore. Arguments intensified and eventually turned physical. She sent him messages asking why he kept putting his hands on her and admitted she was afraid of him when he drank. She showed a cousin a photo of her swollen, injured nose and said it was the result of a fight with him. Friends began noticing bruises and emotional exhaustion. Those closest to her grew increasingly worried. The relationship settled into a painful cycle. An argument would erupt, sometimes ending in violence. Finally, she said she was leaving. Then he would cry, apologize, promise to change, and remind her how attached his sons had become to her. She told herself she had already invested too much time and emotion to walk away. Again and again, she hoped the loving side of him would overcome the volatile one. His ex-wife, Montana, added another layer of complexity. At first, the two women stood on opposite sides of betrayal. Montana had lost her husband to a younger woman, and Livvy had stepped into a home that once belonged to someone else. Over time, though, an unusual friendship formed between them. They exchanged messages, spent time together, and gradually began acting more like allies than rivals. He would later describe them as close. To Livvy, that closeness felt like progress. The one person who understood his worst behavior now seemed to stand beside her rather than against her. Yet the situation remained unstable. He still held emotional ties to his ex-wife and shifted between them in both words and actions. On Livvy's 19th birthday, he messaged Montana claiming he had cheated on Livvy only with her and no one else. When that truth surfaced, it left Livvy humiliated and deeply hurt. By the fall of 2020, the relationship had reached a breaking point. The cycle of jealousy, heavy drinking, violence, and brief reconciliation had repeated too many times. She began to distance herself and even started seeing another man who treated her with more kindness and respect. She wanted space, clarity, and the chance to breathe. He struggled to accept that change. For someone who valued control, losing a partner who helped care for his children and supported his daily life felt like a personal attack. In the weeks leading up to Halloween, their messages revealed rising tension. He accused her of betrayal and abandonment. She spoke of fear and her need for change. Meanwhile, their small community prepared for its usual seasonal gatherings, including a pre-Halloween party at the rural home of a friend. That gathering would bring together him, his ex-wife, his children, and the young woman who had once believed she could change him. On the evening of October 30, 2020, people met at the property to relax, drink, and listen to music. Livvy attended with friends. He was there, as were Montana and the two boys. At first, it resembled many other country parties, children playing, adults drifting between the yard and the house, drinks passing casually from hand to hand. As the night wore on and alcohol flowed, the atmosphere shifted. Montana and Livvy spent time talking and laughing together, appearing comfortable in each other's company. He, meanwhile, drank whiskey and beer and grew increasingly withdrawn, watching the two women who defined his romantic life stand side by side. Later, after some guests had left, he learned that Livvy might stay the night at the house. Combined with his suspicions about another man in her life, the idea ignited his anger. Outside near the vehicles, he confronted Montana. She later said he grabbed her by the neck and attempted to choke her. A friend witnessed him kicking and striking her car and intervened, restraining him so Montana and the children could leave safely. Livvy also left the property. Montana drove with the boys to the home of his mother and grandparents. He followed, still intoxicated and furious, accusing her of siding with Livvy against him. The argument continued in the yard and spilled inside before he eventually left. Montana remained with the children and his relatives. In the early morning hours, the conflict continued through text messages. He sent angry accusations, blamed her for the events of the night, and hinted at violence. In those messages, he cast himself as a man betrayed and pushed into a corner. In the later hours, he sent messages talking about hurting the people he believed had destroyed his life. Around 3 a.m., he texted that he was leaving and told her to come get the boys. Investigators later concluded that he drove away from the property in his cousin's truck, taking a rifle with him, and intending to confront the young woman who had begun pulling away. Sometime before dawn, their paths crossed again. She was driving along Farm to Market Road 83, a quiet stretch of highway east of Hemphill. At some point, her vehicle pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. The position of her body later suggested she remained seated in the driver's seat, legs crossed, as though she had expected a conversation rather than violence. Instead, a single shot from a rifle rang out. The bullet entered her neck and killed her. When authorities reconstructed the scene, they determined the weapon used belonged to Edgar. Bullet fragments recovered from the car, and her body matched test rounds fired from a rifle found nearby. After the gunshot, her car sat motionless in the darkness. A truck connected to Edgar's family was parked behind it. He was found lying on the ground between the two vehicles, curled on his side and covered in blood from an unexplained source, despite having no significant injuries. Shortly after 5 a.m., a passing driver noticed the car stopped in an unusual position. When the driver approached, he saw a young woman slumped over the steering wheel and immediately called for help. Emergency responders arrived, checked for signs of life, and confirmed she was dead. They also found Edgar on the ground behind her vehicle. He was transported by ambulance to a hospital while officers secured the roadside as a crime scene. News of the tragedy did not reach her mother through officials, but through a friend. Darcy drove toward the flashing patrol lights, desperate for answers. For agonizing minutes, no one spoke plainly. Only when she saw the car and the averted gazes of those nearby did she understand that her only child was gone. 19 years of hopes and plans ended on that two-lane road. At the hospital, investigators questioned Edgar. He claimed he had been drinking heavily at home, remembered lying on his porch, and then waking up in an ambulance. He said he had no memory of traveling to the scene or of what had happened there. Officers collected his clothing, noting blood on his face and body but no serious wounds. Within hours, he was arrested and charged with murder as detectives began assembling the case. The autopsy confirmed what the scene indicated. A single high-powered rifle shot to the side of her neck caused catastrophic damage. The medical examiner also documented blunt force injuries consistent with prior allegations of abuse. Toxicology tests found nothing in her system that would explain unusual behavior. The cause of death was clear and violent. Forensic testing produced both clarity and questions. A small bloodstain on his pants matched hers. However, The blood on his face belonged to an unidentified third party. Investigators found no usable fingerprints or definitive DNA on the rifle. Some items from the scene contained mixed DNA profiles that matched neither him nor her. Prosecutors later argued that these uncertainties did not outweigh the totality of evidence, while the defense centered much of its strategy on those gaps. Digital evidence strengthened the prosecution's theory. Phone records and message histories traced his movements and revealed his words in the hours leading up to the killing. In one critical message, sent before the passing driver discovered the scene, he responded to a question about her whereabouts by stating that she was already dead. Investigators viewed that statement as powerful evidence that he had been present at the moment she was killed. Call logs, location data, and timelines supported that conclusion. Detectives also explored whether Montana had played a more direct role. Some of his supporters attempted to shift suspicion toward her. Investigators interviewed her repeatedly, compared her statements with phone data, and even used a polygraph examination. They ultimately concluded that she remained at the grandparents' property after arriving there, and that no evidence placed her on the roadside. The investigation continued to focus on the man who admitted to heavy drinking, sent threatening messages, and was found beside the body. But as the case moved forward, legal proceedings slowed under pandemic-related court delays across the state, complicating an already emotionally charged path to trial. As the case moved forward, pandemic slowdowns meant grand juries met less frequently. Under Texas law, authorities could not hold someone indefinitely without an indictment. After roughly 90 days, a judge was required to consider bond. Despite objections from the district attorney and the family's fears, bond was set at $50,000. Edgar was released under electronic monitoring and returned to the same small community where the killing had taken place. For her family, seeing him back in town felt like a second wound. They encountered him in everyday places. In one painful moment, her mother saw him inside a store and confronted him, overcome with grief and anger. She threw items toward him and shouted accusations. He reported the incident, and officers arrested her. The charges were later dropped, but the episode underscored how raw the loss remained, and how impossible it was to escape each other in a small town. In January 2022, the case finally went to trial. He arrived at the courthouse wearing a protective vest and took his seat at the defense table. Prosecutors laid out what they described as a clear pattern of domestic violence culminating in a night of jealousy and rage. They showed jurors photographs of her injuries, the roadside scene, and evidence from the vehicle. They presented autopsy results, the ballistic match linking bullet fragments to the rifle, and the text messages that traced the escalation from argument to homicide. Witnesses portrayed her as a bright, driven young woman who wanted stability and a career in healthcare. They described him as controlling and jealous, a heavy drinker who used intimidation and physical force. The lead investigator explained the significance of the bloodstain on his pants, the positioning of the vehicles, and the time-stamped message in which he declared her dead before authorities had made any announcement. The defense focused on uncertainty. They emphasized the absence of fingerprints and definitive DNA on the rifle, the mixed DNA found on some items, and the unidentified blood on his face. They suggested someone else could have handled or even fired the weapon. They returned repeatedly to his claim that he had blacked out from alcohol and could not remember the crucial events, implying that without memory, there might be no clear intent. Midway through proceedings, the case took another dramatic turn. After attending the early days of trial, he failed to appear in court. His ankle monitor battery died, and he disappeared. The judge allowed the trial to continue in his absence, as permitted by law. The jury heard closing arguments, deliberated, and returned a guilty verdict on the murder charge. They recommended a sentence of 99 years in prison along with a fine. He was now both a convicted murderer and a fugitive. Local, state, and federal agencies worked together to locate him, and his name appeared on most wanted lists. Tips poured in from different states, but in the end, he had not gone far. In December 2022, officers conducting surveillance near his grandparents' property saw a man step onto a back porch and recognized him. He was arrested without incident, bringing nearly a year on the run to an end. With him back in custody, a formal sentencing hearing was scheduled. In early January 2023, he stood before a judge who imposed the 99-year sentence directly. The court then allowed the family to speak. Her grandmother remembered the girl who earned top grades, completed nursing assistant training, and began college with clear goals. Her mother chose to play a recording of her daughter's graduation speech. The voice of a hopeful teenager speaking about her future filled the courtroom one final time. He entered the Texas prison system to begin serving his sentence, with parole eligibility decades away. For him, life narrowed to cells, counts, and confinement. For her family and friends, the years ahead meant learning to live with absence. They established a scholarship in her name to support local students, especially those pursuing healthcare, so that her commitment to caring for others would continue. The case drew national media coverage. News outlets reported on the killing, the trial, his disappearance, and eventual capture. A true crime television program later featured the case, examining his claim of an alcohol-induced blackout while also telling the story of her life. Each retelling brought both pain and a measure of comfort, keeping her memory alive even as it reopened old wounds. Over time, her story came to symbolize how domestic violence can escalate gradually before erupting in irreversible tragedy. It illustrated how control and jealousy can hide behind professions of love, and how difficult it can be for victims to leave when children and shared communities bind them to abusive partners. It also highlighted how legal delays can return potentially dangerous individuals to communities before trials begin. Her family and supporters hoped that by sharing what happened, others might recognize warning signs sooner, such as controlling behavior, isolation, sudden rage, physical harm, and seek help. They continue to promote awareness of shelters, hotlines, and organizations that assist people escaping abusive relationships in East Texas and beyond. As her story is told, the focus remains on who she was, a hardworking, compassionate young woman devoted to her family, her education, and the promise of a stable future. Those who remember her end with gratitude for everyone who carries her name forward and with a quiet appeal to listen, to notice, and to act when someone may be living in fear. In that way, even a life cut short can continue to protect others. Thank you for listening to Real Crime Stories. Share your thoughts on the story, like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next episode, stay vigilant.